Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome once again to Amateur Astronomers Incorporated, also known as AAI, for our weekly presentations. Now, AAI makes its home at William Morris Sperry Observatory on the campus of Union College in Cranford, New Jersey. And the observatory is now open to the public on Friday nights. And our plans are to continue to provide the weekly presentations online and on Facebook, in addition to being in person in the observatory. You can also follow AAI both on our Facebook page at Amateur Astronomers Incorporated and on Instagram at amateur.astronomers.inc. And if you're interested in joining AAI, you can go to our website, which is www.asterism.org, and click on Join AAI. If you'd like to make a donation to AAI, you can also go to our website and click on the Donate to AAI button. And if you're a scout or a youth group leader and you would like a program, we can provide one suitable to your group. To get to your group scheduled, you go to the homepage on the website and click on the contact button and follow the instructions on how to get scheduled for a program. One important note is that we're going to have Astronomy Day on Saturday, May 20th. It's what we call a split event, meaning in the afternoon from 12 to 3, we're going to be at Trailside Nature and Science Center in Mountainside, New Jersey. And then we will be back at Sperry Observatory in the evening from 7:30 to 10:30. Our website has information about Astronomy Day, and so does our Facebook page. Now, our presenter this evening is AAI member Max Watzky. Now, Max has been a member for several years now. He's a senior in high school. He's given presentations here at AAI, and he's also our communications intern, which means he updates Instagram and Facebook page, sends out emails, etc. So with that, the title of his presentation is Common Tales Through History. And with that, Max, you can take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It is so nice to be here on this lovely night, minus the mosquitoes, to talk to you about comets, which I think are the coolest and have been getting a lot of love in the press and in the media recently. Thank you, Leonardo DiCaprio. Attention, which is well-deserved, if you ask me. But most of the focus with comets recently has been on scientific discoveries. And of course, the perennial concern that a comet might one day hit Earth. However, comets, I want to talk about something.
Speak a little louder.
A little louder? Okay. Yeah. I want to talk about something a little bit different. Tonight, I'm going to talk about the history of how humans have seen comets from 1000 BC up until the 20th century, from superstition to philosophy to science, and then back again. I think that the way that different societies and cultures have viewed and interpreted comets can often tell us a lot about how those cultures saw the world around them more generally. And in that way, we can connect comets to broader human history and anthropology. But if I was going to talk about every major comet in society in that amount of time, 3,000 years, I would keep you here all night. So I've decided to focus on a few particularly interesting stories and characters from this rich comet history. But first, to start, let's go over a little bit about what comets actually are. At their core, no pun intended, comets are dirty snowballs, composed mostly of rock, dust, ice, as well as some other frozen gases like carbon dioxide and methane. Over the last few decades, impactor probes and analysis of comet meteorites have also turned up the presence of some organic compounds like methanol, as well as trace amounts of amino acids and DNA bases. These discoveries have led some astronomers and biologists to think that comet impacts may have played a key role in the development of life here on Earth. Talk about comet history. The key factor that separates comets from asteroids and other rocky objects in the solar system is that comets outgas. They release gaseous material producing both a coma, a kind of unbound bright atmosphere, and a tail, a long chain of gas and other material which can extend for millions on millions of miles. These tails are produced as comets approach the sun because of solar wind and solar radiation. Comet tails always point directly away from the sun rather than away from the direction of travel. Most comets come from the Kuiper belt or the Oort cloud, which means that they travel in these highly eccentric orbits, passing all the way down from the outer solar system in towards the sun in regular intervals. This process can take anywhere up from decades to millions of years. Of course, there are a few exceptions. We've recently discovered some comets that orbit in the main asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, as well as some asteroids that have like orbits. So that's pretty interesting. All right, enough with introduction. Let's put some of that knowledge aside for a moment and imagine what the experience must have been like to see a comet in ancient times for someone living maybe more than 2,500 years ago. A comet visible to the naked eye occurs maybe once every few decades. So it would have been a truly strange sight. Maybe it was terrifying. Maybe it was awe-inspiring. It was probably different for different groups of people. But unfortunately, we don't really know for certain. We don't have any conclusive records of any comet sightings until around 7th century BC. Before that point, we do have a few clues. We have East Asian oracle bones. In some ancient Chinese and other East Asian societies, diviners and astrologers would try to tell the future using the bones of deceased animals, and they'd sometimes make inscriptions of notes onto the bones, which have been preserved. And there's some inscriptions which a few people who specialize in the field think might be referring to comets, but we're not sure. The other really ancient source that we're not so sure about are Sumerian tablets about transient astronomical events, which may or may not refer to comets in some cases. But nothing that we can 100% confirm. So around the 7th century BC, though, we start seeing writings from ancient Chinese astronomers who had begun taking meticulous, highly precise measurements of comet shapes and locations in the sky. In the top right corner up here, I've included part of a Chinese manuscript dated to 168 BC, which lists and depicts several different kinds of comets. The manuscript also hints at some prevailing ancient beliefs about comets. Each drawing up here, you can sort of see the nucleus and the coma represented by these circles, and then the tail, these sort of stem-like little drawings. Each of these drawings, though, is accompanied by a description of some kind of terrible event, an earthquake, a famine, a rebellion, the death of some king or general, or something else. But more on that in a moment. The next societies to write about comets were those of Greece and the Near East. By the turn of the millennium, in fact, the ancient Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Assyrians, and then later the Romans had all recorded the passage of several comets, including Comet Halley, which is described on this Babylonian tablet from 164 BC. Comet Halley is going to show up a lot in this talk, actually, because it's been visible in the sky every 75 or 76 years for as long as we can tell, all of human history. And so a lot's been written about it. So what did ancient societies actually think of these comets, these strange apparitions in the sky? The answer is pretty mixed and pretty complicated. On one hand, many societies developed philosophical and even proto-scientific beliefs about comets, trying to understand them as natural phenomena that existed in the real world. Some societies, like the Assyrians, the Babylonians, this is an Assyrian engraving here, took detailed notes on comets, classifying their shapes and recording their positions in the sky whenever they passed overhead. And some of them seem to have even understood that comets like Halley came into view at regular intervals. According to the Roman author Seneca, the ancient Chaldean people of the Middle East and modern-day Iraq and around the 1st century BC even understood that comets were celestial bodies like the sun, the moon, and the planets, which appeared infrequently because their orbits were elongated. Pretty impressive stuff that early in history. Meanwhile, in ancient Greece, comets were believed to be something akin to rainbows, distortions of light in the atmosphere. This belief was popularized by Aristotle, who suggested that comets are caused by, quote, windy exhalations from the Earth, which distorted light as they went. And this mode of thought would persist well into the Middle Ages in Europe. Even Galileo, living 2,000 years later, and Galileo got a lot right about the solar system, bought into this idea that comets were caused by distortions in the atmosphere. Now, on the other hand, views of comets were heavily influenced by superstition, religion, and folk beliefs, even in societies that also viewed comets scientifically. To almost all ancient societies, the sky was a kind of sacred place, associated with the supernatural and the primeval. And so an unnatural change in the sky, like a comet or an eclipse, might be seen as a divine omen, either positive or negative. 9 times out of 10, though, it's negative. As we saw in the manuscript a few minutes ago, the ancient Chinese viewed comets as bringers of calamity, death, destruction, and so on. Part of the reason they took such careful measurements of comets was to try and figure out what they were predicting exactly. The belief in comets as omens ran extremely deep and often influenced important decisions. In 712 AD, after a comet was sighted over the capital city, the Chinese Tang Emperor Ruzhong abdicated his throne, citing bad astrological signs. A lot of other cultures around the world seem to have independently developed this belief in comets as bad omens. To the Mayans, Toltecs, and Aztecs of Mesoamerica, comets were often seen as portending the death of rulers. A primary source in Aztec history discusses the appearance of a comet in 1519, very shortly before the arrival of Spanish conquistadors, and was, I guess, correctly in this case, interpreted as spelling doom for the Emperor Moctezuma here, who was deposed by the Spanish and his kingdom destroyed. Now, I said earlier that comets in the ancient world were almost always associated with negative things, disaster, calamity, so on. But of course, there are exceptions. In ancient Rome, comets were interpreted in many different ways. For example, take the Romans' reaction to the comet of 44 BC, which appeared over Rome shortly after the assassination of Julius Caesar. Now, Julius Caesar gets a lot of bad press today, rightfully so. He's ruining my life in AP Latin right now. But anyway, Julius Caesar was extremely popular right before his death among the urban poor because of his efforts to redistribute grain and land. And so when this giant, bright comet appeared right after he died, many of his supporters proclaimed it as a sign that he had been deified. He'd been made into a god after death. Augustus, Caesar's adopted son and the first true emperor of Rome, was able to use the comet's religious significance to great effect as a tool for propaganda, helping to bolster his legitimacy through the tumult of several civil wars. Later, he'd have these coins printed showing the comet of his deified father on the back. Here you can see this is the nucleus, up there the tail, accompanied by the words Divus Julius, Julius the god. So clearly, to the Romans, comets would appear to be a positive thing. And even when the Romans thought of comets negatively, they didn't always take themselves so seriously. The other fun story about comets in ancient Rome comes to us about 100 years later, when the Emperor Vespasian, this bald guy over here, was lying on his deathbed in 79 AD. So he's lying down. He's very, very sick. And the Roman historian Suetonius tells us that at this very moment, someone, either like an attendant or a family member, rushes in and reports that a comet has been sighted in the sky, and it's not a good thing. Our word comet actually comes from the ancient Latin coma or the ancient Greek cometes, which each means something like long-haired or long-bearded, since the ancient Romans and Greeks thought of comets as looking like heads with lots of luscious locks coming off the back. So this attendant rushes in and is like, Emperor, this comet, this long-haired star has appeared in the sky. Surely it's a sign you're going to die. And so Vespasian, in his infinite wit, who's bald again, by the way, says something like, a long-haired star, I think I'll be okay. The Romans thought that was funny. I don't know. All right, let's fast forward a little bit to the Middle Ages and cover some more ground here. Through this time period, from around the 6th century to around the 16th or 17th centuries, we don't see a ton of new innovations in comet science or developments in comet mythology. In Europe, the mood around comets had turned decisively negative, and many calamitous events were associated with them during this time. In the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is one detailed primary source from medieval England, are preserved dozens of mentions of comets which were said to have foretold the deaths of bishops, the arrival of famines, and even one time where the River Thames in London dried up. One of the first illustrations of comets from this time period comes from the Bayeux Tapestry here, commissioned to celebrate the victory of William the Conqueror over the Anglo-Saxon English in the Battle of Hastings. That year, Comet Halley made a particularly bright apparition, which was seen as a sign that England's old king, a guy by the name of Harold, shown here, looks kind of upset, was about to die. We can see in the Latin here next to the comet, it's actually really terrible resolution. Iste mirat stella, they marvel at the strange star, and they say AP Latin is useless. Okay, let's skip ahead again to the scientific revolution and talk a little bit more about some of the main contributors to knowledge about comets at that time. One of the first astronomers to study comets in depth in the modern era was Tycho Brahe, an infamous, eccentric Danish guy who was the court mathematician for the king. Brahe got up to all sorts of crazy stuff on the side. He lost his nose in a duel, and he had a trained elk as a pet that fell down the stairs after getting drunk. But anyway, Brahe made a number of important discoveries about comets, all without a telescope. In 1577, Brahe used the astronomical technique of parallax to measure the distance to a comet for the first time, seeing how much that comet seemed to shift in the sky depending on where he took his measurements from. He very quickly realized that this comet, the one he was observing in 1577, was over 4 times further away than the moon. So clearly it wasn't an atmospheric phenomenon like Aristotle had proposed. So in one fell swoop, 2,000 years of modern European belief about comets was gone. Second, Brahe found that he couldn't fit the path of this comet into any kind of circular orbit around the Earth, like he was able to with the sun, the moon, and the planets, noticing that the comet seemed to travel in a shape that could be best modeled with an ellipse. This discovery, among many others, would soon help spur Kepler's model, of a heliocentric universe, with all objects orbiting the sun in elliptical orbits. Kepler's model was then confirmed by the up-and-coming Isaac Newton, who was able to use his theories of gravity to prove Kepler's laws of motion, putting all the puzzle pieces in place to finally accurately model comet orbits for the first time in history. The man to put those pieces together was none other than Edmund Halley, one of Newton's benefactors, who in 1705 published a book detailing the orbits of 23 different comets based on data collected on them over the course of hundreds of years. And he showed in that book, in that paper, that all of these comets moved in highly eccentric ellipses. Halley's comet, which I've already mentioned a few times now, is named that way because of his work determining its orbit, work that allowed Edmund Halley to accurately predict the date of its next return, down all the way to the week. The comet had appeared once every 75 years or so, going all the way back to the dawn of human history. But until Halley and the scientific revolution, nobody could really prove it was the same comet every time. However, the development of a sound scientific understanding of comets didn't mean people stopped being afraid of them. Not only did superstitions persist, but people also found new scientific reasons to be afraid of comets. For instance, the very real possibility that one might hit Earth. Don't look up style. I did a lot of digging around in old archives, and the earliest mention I could find of a real panic around the possibility of a comet collision comes from 1832 with the passage of this now little-known comet called Biela. That year, the German astronomer Heinrich Olbers, great name, made a dire discovery. The comet was going to pass right through Earth's orbit, and he even had a date for when this was going to happen, October 29th of that year. Well, I had a hard time getting my hands on accounts from this time. Some later sources, like this New York Times article from 1865 tell us about the minor panic that ensued, with major newspapers around the country reporting on Earth's imminent destruction, and many people fearing the end of days was coming. The only problem was that on October 29th, when the comet was due to cross Earth's orbit, Earth wasn't even going to be there. That would take another month. The media had misinterpreted his calculations. Although many astronomers stepped in to assuage the public's fears and the panic eventually died down, Biela stuck around in the collective memory for a while. Here, we see it portrayed 40 years later in an 1877 Chilean magazine with the words "Fin del mundo" accompanying it, "the end of the world." Interestingly, a few decades later, Comet Biela began to break up, which produced an incredible meteor shower when Earth passed through its cloud of debris in 1872. And in fact, it was Comet Biela that taught us that meteor showers are caused by comet tails. I'd like to finish up with a similar story from 1910, with the apparition of the comet Halley once again, and this one's a doozy. Halley's 1910 apparition marked several firsts for comet science. Not only was it the first time that we'd photographed a comet, but it was also the first time we'd ever performed spectroscopy on a comet, breaking up the light from Halley into its different wavelengths and using that knowledge to figure out what its composition was. And so when the spectroscopy results came back in the February of 1910, we found something very, very interesting. Trace amounts of the chemical CN2, cyanogen gas, very similar to cyanide. And it's highly, highly toxic, even in very, very small amounts. However, nothing would have been made of this if it wasn't for one man, Camille Flammarion, who's the publisher of the most renowned astronomical magazine in France at the time, who was convinced that later that year, when Earth passed through the tail of Halley, that we were all going to die. The cyanogen gas was going to wipe out all life on Earth. So his message began to spread, and people began to freak out. As with Biela's comet 80 years prior, many other astronomers published articles and papers trying to assuage the public's fears. But this time, things had already been set in motion, and their efforts came to no avail. The New York Times reported that the terror occasioned by the near approach of Halley had seized hold of a large part of the population of Chicago. The Atlanta Constitution reported that people in Georgia were preparing safe rooms and covering the keyholes of their doors to try to keep the gas out. One Georgian man, they said, armed himself with a gallon of whiskey and his friends lower him into a well to prepare for the end of days. I don't really know exactly what he was trying to do there, but clearly he was preparing for something. But anyway, an entire market even developed around the hoax of this cyanogen gas, with people selling gas masks, pills, and even anti-comet umbrellas. Don't ask me how that would work. The night we passed through the tail, enormous crowds sought refuge in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, and in Bavaria, crowds of farmers processed through the streets and in the fields, carrying crucifixes and images of saints, trying to ward off the disaster. The entire world stood still. But obviously life on Earth survived, and that's because there was barely any cyanogen in the tail to begin with, and whatever cyanogen there was pretty much bounced off and scattered in the atmosphere. As this newspaper from Syracuse, New York reports, nothing happened, adding that learned sky gazers had united in saying, "I told you so." So, learned sky gazers, I hope you enjoyed my talk. It was a really fun thing for me to research and write about. And if you're interested in learning more, I have a few sources. I don't expect you to memorize links or whatever, but these books and articles and periodicals were good, and I hope you like them. Thank you. All right. Any questions?
If anybody has questions.
also pull up the Google Meet on here so I can see you guys as well.
Does anybody have any questions here in the audience? Go ahead, Max, there's somebody over here. Go
Have a
ahead.
question over
Yes,
here?
Max.
What are comet tails made of?
Comet tails
Yeah.
are mostly gas, but there's also some dust mixed in there. It's mostly so like the gas which sublimates off of water ice, but there's also some carbon monoxide and methane and some other gases mixed in there. Another question?
You said the comet tails always face the sun. So even if
Away from the sun, yeah.
Oh, away.
That's right, yeah. Sorry if I misspoke.
Back here.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, how is the comet formed?
sorry.
How is originally comet formed?
How is a comet formed?
Oh, that's a great question. So comets, along with most other bodies in the solar system, were formed several billion years ago as the sort of cloud of material around the growing sun collapsed into this disk, and objects started accumulating as gravity tugged stuff together. Most comets coming to be seen by us now from the outer reaches of the solar system, where all the water is and other gases are still frozen. And often what happens is, especially far in the Oort cloud, you'll have either some tidal forces or a passing star that'll push a comet down out of its orbit in towards the sun. Another question from over here?
Is there one right now that's closest to us that we're monitoring?
So there was one a few months ago. There was that green comet that people were reporting on. And I think, oh my God, this was in like the newsletter from a few months ago, if anyone can remember. But there's a comet that's predicted to get pretty bright next year. I don't know if anyone can remember the name. It's decently large, like a few kilometers wide. And I think it's expected to get up to at least magnitude like 2 or 1. So about as bright as like the brighter stars that we see most nights around here in Jersey. Next year, yeah. I'll come talk to me like right afterwards because we can look it up together.
Oh, that'd be good. Thank you. When's the next time Halley's Comet is expected?
The next, okay, let's do a little bit of math. So the last time was 1986, and so we're going to expect it next when 2061, yeah, that's it, or so, give or take.
Thank you.
Max, can you say something about Oumuamua or Perskov?
Yeah, I haven't been keeping up to date on Oumuamua. Isn't the latest consensus that it's an interstellar comet, not an interstellar asteroid or something like that? Yeah. So Oumuamua is the first comet that we've discovered that came from and then returned to outside of our solar system. It was discovered a few years ago. I wish I guess it spent more time on the sort of like more modern scientific history of comets. That would have been I think that would be a cool follow-up talk. But for this one, I mostly just wanted to talk about ancient, medieval, and sort of pre-modern history, and then bring that up to a sort of nice conclusion. But Oumuamua was fun. Anywhere online? Anywhere else here?
I have a weird question.
Sure, go for
the
it.
tail itself, like it's got gas and dust and all that, right?
Yes,
Does it stay with the comet? Is the gravity strong enough, or does it eject and introduce all that?
that's a great question, actually. Most of it, in fact, almost all of it, I believe, does get ejected and stays behind, orbiting around the sun. And it's actually when we pass through those remnants of comet tails when we get meteor showers. So every meteor shower that we see is associated with a comet, either past or present.
I figured, after millions of years, it's going to lose most of its gas and dust eventually.
It's true, yeah. They all sort of run out. So Halley's going to run out eventually.
But does it, I don't know, replenish if it goes to another cloud or something? Forms?
I'm actually not sure.
I don't know.
Maybe. That's a very interesting question.
Maintain size or get bigger over time. I think that's what
Thank you. Yeah. Awesome. Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, Max. That was great. Very informative. And I want to thank everybody for coming this evening. I just want to remind everybody about that next Friday is the third Friday of the month, and that will be our monthly meeting. We're having a guest speaker who will be Heather Prince. She was a graduate student at Princeton University, and now she's at Rutgers University, I believe, as a fellowship. The title of her presentation is Illuminating the Dark Sector of the Universe with the Vera C. Rubin Observatory. And our meeting starts at 8 o'clock up at the Roy Smith Theater. It's open to both the public and the members. We encourage you to come. And I'm just, again, reminding everybody about Astronomy Day, which is on Saturday, May 20th. And also, if you'd like to join AAI, you can go to our website, which is www.asterism.org, and click on AAI.
Yeah, Max, as always, great talk. Thank you.
Okay, and then thank you for joining us tonight and wishing everyone clear skies.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah.
Will you guys be
Mark, you can stop.
here